Well, hello, everybody. This is Mike Pucciarelli, and tonight, I'll be talking about, landscape photography. I'll be talking about camera settings with the R5 and R6. Those are two cameras that I use. I got some basic equipment you can buy, you can use. We'll be talking about the Adobe Bridge and also Adobe Photoshop. First, I'll introduce who I am. I started professional photography in 2010. In 2015, I joined Professional Photographers America. 2008, 17, and 18, I joined several affiliate clubs. And I'm also part of American Society of Photographers, and I'm proud of that organization. It has a lot of member benefits, and so does Professional Photographers America. The agenda tonight, we'll be talking about some equipment that we could use that you could easily get at a store. And then we're talking about some camera settings for the Canon R5 and R6. And I'll be talking about, I have a demo in Adobe Camera Raw, and then a Photoshop demo. And if there's time, maybe I'll give a screenshot presentation demo of Adobe Photoshop and Camera Raw. Help you answer any more questions. I'm going to show my portfolio. These are some shots that I did with Shenandoah, some color. But tonight we'll be talking about a few filters we can use. So basically, I use several kinds of filters. The filter I'm going to talk more about tonight is the circular polarizer. And it's a great way to add more richness to your photograph by taking away harsh light you don't want to see, like glares. There's also the UV filter where if you have low lights, we're talking more also about the neutral density filter. I recommend a 2 or 3 stop. Then you have the split tone. It sort of functions like the circular polarizer. Tonight, I'll be talking again about the variable N neutral density filter. This is a great thing to use with waterfalls. And then I'll end with, in terms of filters, end with maybe the 10 stop, where you reduce the stops by 10 stops. If it's like a real bright sunny day, you definitely want to use this filter. In some, I gotta admit someone. Some of my filters, they fit multiple lens, like the Canon 35 and also the 7200. And then my 24 and 85, these are both primes. These are the same filters, same size filters. I'm going to talk more, in detail about these filters. This circular polarizer, this is where, if you want to put more detail in the sky, you turn it to the right until it's dark, or you have like a nice darkened sky. And I have the 77 meter, which fits my 100 to 400. And then on my 67, which fits my aperture 4 of 7200. And then I have my 58, which fits my wide, and also 85. And then my 50 prime, this 52 meter would fit that. So they all work well. And they put like a natural nice vignetting to the sky, which makes the photograph look real nice. And like I said, polarizers, they could reduce glare they could reduce unwanted glare in photography, landscape. They could also do the same thing in product photography too. Plus, in product photography, you use something like the black card, but when you're in landscape, you probably wouldn't want to use a black card because you're photographing something a lot bigger. So these photographs, these filters, it could, by taking away the unwanted lights, you make the photographs look more richer. The colors come out better. Then we got the 10-stop neutral density filter. This is where if you have you have a lot of lights. You have maybe too much light to work with. You want to definitely use this filter where you're reducing exposure by 10 full stops. If you go as wide as you can go, you want to nail the stop by 2 stops, and you'll get a good reading on a histogram.
There's recording in progress.
Okay. This is another one. We're having echo problems. All right, so this is one way to produce a nice waterfall, the white silkiness. Maybe everyone can just mute. That would help out. So, the 10-stop neutral density filter, it's great if you have a lot of lights. And if you narrow the aperture by 2 stops, you can get a good and better reading on a histogram. Then you get the multiple stop ND filters. This is where I'd recommend, when I started out with landscape photography, I started out using the 2-stop neutral density filter. And then to get the white water silkiness of the waterfall, I'd use a certain aperture, like aperture 18. I'd use maybe 0.5 of a second or 0.3, and you get like a good white photograph of a white silky waterfall. So these are the filters, the neutral density filters, and I recommend getting the full set, the 1-stop, 2-set. The 1-stop, 2-stop, 3 stops. Now, the difference between an ND filter and also the polarizer is that the ND filter, you're making the whole frame dark, or you're taking away the light, too much light on the whole frame. But the polarizer, this is where part of the frame is dark, like the top part. And I'm recording it, so if you want to listen to it again, you're more than welcome to. I'll post a YouTube link in the video section of the meetup groups. This is a filter to get. This is the best thing to use, the best filter to use. And this is a TIFF-on, and this works for 2 lenses, and this works for 2 lenses. And you reduce the stop between 2 and 8 stops, and you take a reading, and you might want to reduce it by 4 stops, 2 stops, depending on the light, depending on the speed of the waterfall. And this is a thing to use where if you don't like what you see in the picture, you turn this. If you want more light, you turn it. If you want less light, you turn it. And the thing about this is you could work between 2 and 8 stops. So maybe 3 stops is not good enough. Maybe 4 or 5 stops is good enough. And these are things to get with any, lens. So it's a variable and neutral density filter. And I recommend Tiffin. Tiffin's a great brand. This is a level cube. or you could help level your photograph. You want to make sure your tripod is straight. You want to make sure ground is straight. And this is great to use if you have a wide angle lens. You could straighten the horizontals, you could straighten the verticals. So you have a bubble for the horizontal, a bubble for the vertical. This is the Hoodman screen cover. This is where, if you want to look at your screen on a bright sunny day, you should get this. And you could just focus it with the ring up here. Another way you could do this is you could just look through the eyepiece of the camera. You see your photo that way. Some people prefer this. I prefer both, and they both work well. Now, since I'm outdoors, I recommend using the wired cable release. This is for the R6. This is for the R5. This also fits my Canon 7D, because when I was able to use the same cable, I was relieved because I didn't have to buy a new cable release. You could also use your phone. You could use your cell phone. You could use other Wi-Fi, but when you take a waterfall, you may have a hard time connecting. That's why I just rather use, the cable release. This is another way to hold the camera still, where suppose you want to be more than 5 feet away, maybe 10 feet, you would use this, where this would fit in any hot shoe of any Canon. These two things here, where it's basically the same piece of equipment, but this wire part is different. And these both run on 2 AAA batteries. And you have a lot more flexibility with this wireless remote than the wired remote. You have 80 meters of your remote distance. You have 30 possible channels to work with. It has a flexible timer, and the ways you could use it with the light painting, you could use the same thing with waterfalls. A lot more flexible, so anything the wired, this could do a lot better. Now, this will work with any modern Canon camera. These are my 2 tripods. A lot of times I like to use my landscape one. I sawed off the pole here, so if I want to go really low, I can do that. And I always want to use ISO 100. And I always, with the tripod, without a tripod, maybe, depending on what I'm doing, portraits, maybe 3200, ISO, maybe ISO. It depends how much light and the condition of the light. And for landscape photography, I always want to use a cable release. Keep the camera still, like when I'm doing waterfalls, scenic views. And you want to keep the camera still for HDR images, and I'll talk about that later. You could have many more than 3, but I'll still use 3. This is my Mirrorless R6, R5. I recommend either the R6, R5, or R3. They have other cameras out too, like the R7 that can print from the camera to the printer. They have the Canon R10. A lot of stuff is coming out, but for my needs, I recommend either the R5 or R6. And they're very thankful for this Canon converter because I can use all my non-RF lenses. So that could save me a ton of money. And I have a YouTube channel on the R6, and I also have a YouTube channel on the R5, and I'll show my YouTube channel later. These are all my lenses where I use EF24, 85. A lot of times it's still life. I start with EF35. Now, if I'm doing a waterfall, I can start with 35, but sometimes I may have to go to my 70-200 to zoom in close. EF 100 to 400 I like to use for wildlife. All my primes are great to use. they're sharp in focus, and they're cheaper in price, and they all help me do my job. We have image stabilization. Other cameras like Nikon call it vibrate reduction. I always have it turned off because a lot of times I use a tripod, but I just keep it off. So, but if you use this feature with the tripod, turn it off because the image may not process correctly. You may have color share problems. You may do damage to the pixels. If you take it off the camera, put it on, but I always have the stabilizer turned off. Now, outdoor photography, I always want to use autofocus. Maybe from time to time I can use manual. Like for light painting, I start with autofocus and manual focus, but outdoor, I always want to use the autofocus. It's quicker, it helps me do my job. These are my camera cases where I collect my gear. These cases I could buy at a computer store. They're very sturdy, very tough. They're small, they're convenient. They'll last for a lifetime, and they don't take up a lot of space. Now for the Canon settings, the R6 is here. It's 20 megs. I want to shoot in the RAW, and I always use the JPEG if I want to do Wi-Fi. I never touch the JPEG. And this is my R5, where I use a C-RAW, condensed RAW. It's about the same size, but and then I use the smallest 2 JPEG for the Wi-Fi. And I always do all my editing in a DNG. I convert the file from the CR3. Because the DNG files, they come up quicker when you launch Windows Explorer, and they're easier to work with. My camera could look something like this when I do still life. Landscape, I would have 1/25 f/16. I always want to use ISO 100. And I always want to set the Kelvin temperature to 56K, 5600K. And I like to apply the standard, I'll talk about this later, because it applies a little sharpening to the image. And this camera, the R5 or 6 has Wi-Fi. And I'm only using running one file, using one card to write one, I'm not using 2 cards, but you can use 2 cards. We'll talk about that later. I'll talk about the focusing mode. I'll talk about the drive mode. I always want to shoot in RAW. I always want to shoot either in manual or bulb mode. I always want to be in the single shooting mode because a lot of times I'm on the tripod. These other methods work great, like the 10-second timer, the 2-second timer. But for outdoor landscape, I would like to use this with the tripod, but I tried the others without. They work well too. Like I said, the standard apply. I use standard for everything. It applies a little sharpening to the image. The other settings don't. The portraits or landscapes a little soft, but they're good for the uses. The N neutral means no settings applied. And the certain settings to the F, monochrome is when it's black and white. I do all my black and white in digital photography. And they've used the settings from 1, 2, or 3. You have any settings you like for the 1, 2, or 3. So when you click on here, the settings, whatever you choose, will be automatic. So the zone autofocus, the vertical, the horizontal, they're all great to use. I've also tried experimenting with this, the point around, the expand. These are also good. But I prefer to be the zone autofocus because you focus on several parts of the photograph. And I prefer this more than the 1053.AF. And the thing about the 1053, the camera may reset more, and that's why I refer to zone autofocus. And it's a big upgrade for my 70, which only has 19 points. That's a big difference. Then you have the single points, where you just move the cursor. Then you have spot autofocus. It's great for macro photography, and it's where a more intelligent single point focus occurs. Then you have tracking, where you could use some AI here. I tried this, I like this, but I prefer the zone autofocus. It's better, I like it. The thing about the tracking is you can set up the portraits, you can enable the face and eye and the subjects. You can also set it to animals, you can set it to vehicles. So there's a lot you can do with this tracking. And this is where the tracking is. And this is where the zone autofocus is. Now the white balance, I never use auto. I think that's the worst to use, least natural. And all these other settings, these presets, would be better to use than auto. I always, set my white balance at 56K. Or I could just come to the preset, because 56K is natural daylight. Now, these others are worth experimenting. Like if you have cloudy, use the cloudy preset. And if you want a nice blue sky, you want to make sure your back is face to the sun, you want to use tungsten. And then you have flash and fluorescent. You can always reset the Kelvin. Then you have custom, where you want to shoot, where you shoot a white card. You shoot a white card, and then you got to set it in the camera. Now, if the light changes, you got to do a new white card. But I recommend either the daylight option or set the Kelvin at 5600 for natural daylight. And high-speed ISO noise reduction, I never use this. I always have it disabled. Low is good to use, but standard I'd stay away from. But with the properly exposed image, I just rather disable it, because the properly exposed image, there's no noise. And I also disable the long exposure noise reduction. Again, I disable it for a properly exposed image. And there's two settings. You're okay with auto, but enable, I would not use, because, when you take a picture, it take a while to get back to the original screen. But I'd rather just disable this. Now the color space is, I always start from Adobe RGB, and then I convert to sRGB. Now, the two ways I can use the sRGB, if I copy and paste a photograph, I do not check off that convert to sRGB profile. If I post on the web, I do. Now, there's a big color difference between the Adobe RGB and sRGB. The difference between 57 billion colors and 16.7 million colors. A lot of colors. And some people start from maybe from ProPhoto, but I'd just rather just start here. ProPhoto is changing, but you have over 201 trillion colors, but you can only recognize 2 or 3 million colors. That's why I just rather start from the Adobe RGB. Maybe convert, but this is changing the ProPhoto. And you get CMYK, it's great for printing, and it's also great for when you do Photoshop, if you have too much yellow in a photograph or too much magenta. So you don't always have to use RGB, and I could maybe show that in Photoshop. And you got the cropping aspect ratio, where since we're using full frame, I want to use the full, because you're using all the pixels. you're taking advantage of all the pixel powers. And then you have 1.6, it's great for the sensor C lens, but you don't use all the pixel power. Then the others are great for 1.1, the 4.3, 6.9. But I just, since I'm using full frame, I just want to use full because I want to take advantage of all the pixels. So exposure bracketing, I always have it at 2 stops. Now I know later you can have more than 2 or 3. You can have many more, but I always have a stop at difference so I can work with all the pixels on the histogram. So you have your histogram, and there should be nothing touching on the left, nothing touching on the right. And there should be no spikes. Now, when I first bought my R6, the thing was always focusing, and I just switched it to manual focus. Then I did some research where you could disable this, so when you disable it, when you press the button, the camera will focus. So when you don't press the button, the camera won't focus. So it's better to disable this than to enable it because you're in control of the focus when you disable it. Now for HDR, I always want to use 1/3 of increments for, shutter, ISO, aperture. And for bracketing exposures, you could have many more than 3, but I still use 3. Now, the card recording features. See, the R5, R6, R3, they could record to multiple cards, 2 cards. R5 and R6 can both use the XC card ending in HC, where the difference between the XC, it's greater speed, greater storage. I mean, there's a difference between 32 gigabytes of data storage and the speed. The XC is like 10 times faster than the HC in the card. And then the R5 can only, this Type E memory card can only work with the R5. Now, both cameras can do video, but this is where the R5 is a better camera than the R6. But the Type E memory card, you can capture 4K and full HD video. You could have great speeds, read speeds of 1750 megabits per second. Write speeds 1,000 megabits per second. So now we're going to go into the Adobe RAW. I'm going to find my Shenandoah there. Where I convert on my DNG, tier 3 is the DNG. These are my selections. Where I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to Open in Camera RAW. Now, some people like these changes. I don't. I mean,
Michael,
yeah.
you're still showing the PDF. You're not showing your screen live. So we're just saying the Photoshop.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. Wait a minute. Thanks for pointing this out. Yeah, I'm sorry. See my screen now, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks. Sorry about that. So these are all my DNG files. I convert them, the Canon will produce, .cr3. And then I convert everything over to DNG with the DNG converter. So all these files will end in the DNG. So this is a waterfall. This is what I used, the variable and neutral density filter. And then here, I could use either the polarizer to bring out the colors or just a two-stop and neutral density filter. I think I might have used it clear, but if you look over here, that this is aperture 18 and it's 8 seconds. This is aperture 4 and this is 1/25. Make sure that your ISO is 100. Here it's somehow 125, but sometimes it just, but I recommend just using, ISO 100. Where, since these are different files, I'm going to work with one at a time. Different settings. So now I don't touch the exposure. Maybe I can work with the contrast, the highlights, color. I like to leave alone. Then the effects, this is where I can work with a little sharpening, texture. Now, the first thing I would do is I'd set the white balance. I'd find a gray, I'd click it so the colors are more balanced. And you got the effects. We're talking about a little sharpening, maybe the 1 to 3. I don't touch this part. And there's some photographers that put an S. Color mixing, I leave alone. Sharpening, I don't want to touch, and I don't want to touch the manual. I want to leave this alone because that's at the end of the Photoshop file. Now the optics, where you want to have both of these checked, you want to say remove chromatic aberration so that you take away any color problems of the edges or any fringing problems. Then use profile, whatever lens you're using, you'll use the profile corrections. So whenever I use my R6, R5, these are automatically checked off. And if they're not checked off, they should be. And then you get the geometry. A lot of times I just click A. Now, if I have to rotate, I like to do that in Photoshop. I would just click the A. I'm going to click cancel. I'm going to click yes. Same thing over here where right click, open in camera raw. And I want to find the white balance is the first thing. When I click on this to make it, you neutralize the colors. Maybe I can play with the temperature. I don't touch this part. I like to leave the saturation vibrance alone. You got, maybe I could do this is -12 highlights, positive. And they got the texture. I like to have it at 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 3. I don't want to touch the vignetting. I don't want to touch the grain. Curve. And so, the detail, I want to leave the detail alone. You get the noise, it's an AI, but I don't want to mess around with the AI. Some people like AI, others don't. So I don't want to touch the AI. You want to make sure that you remove chromatic aberration and use profile correction is correct, checked off. Tells you what lens. I'm using the f4 7200 Canon. I'll leave the distortion vignetting alone here. And when I click, I would just click off the A. I'm gonna click cancel because anytime you want to reset a photograph, you open in Camera Raw, you come up here and you say reset the default. This will bring it back to the original settings. So the color where I click on a gray here. When I click on a gray, let's see, whoops. You make the colors look more balanced. Got the effect where this, I want to add between 1 and 2. I leave the curve alone. I don't touch it. I leave the color mixer. This is great for black and white, or maybe I could, work with color ace, but I leave this alone. Color grading where I can work with midtones, I can work with shadows, I can work with shadows, I can work with highlights separately. I can do them all at once, but I'll leave this alone. I don't touch the detail. I don't play with reduce noise with AI. I leave that alone. I remove chromatic aberration. I use profile corrections. Optics, we talked about that, and then geometry. I would click the A to straighten the photograph. I'm going to click cancel. Now, another thing, I don't know if you could see my screen. Suppose called Photoshop Image Processor. You probably can't see my screen. It would say select images. And if I'm saving and copying Photoshop, I want to make sure I do not check off the sRGB. But if I'm saving to the web, I would. You probably have a hard time seeing the screen. No, I don't have another presentation either. Okay, thought I did. Okay, now we're going to go into the Adobe Photoshop. Let's see. I'm going to open up some photographs. I'm going to open up, let's see, I'm going to go to my desktop. Let's see, let's go to Shenandoah. So these are all the raw files, and this is where I want to open up Photoshop. I'm going to go one file at a time. I think I'll do that. So this step over here is one of the last things. So what you can do is right now I'm in the channels RGB. If you want to switch to CMYK, you just go to image mode. You could switch to CMY color. You could switch to lab color. Like if you have a lot of yellow in a photograph, you don't always have to be in RGB. Let's make a background copy of this layer. So then I could do a few things. I'd run this action. Let's see. Whoops. already did that. And I always use MFP for all my filter because my name is Michael Francis Pucciarelli, so it's recognizing my actions. So when I do this, when I run this action, I make a duplicate copy, which is here. This is part of another action I do later. And then I play the action. And this is where, when I play this action, I do edit, edit. We do I do auto tone, auto contrast, and auto color, one right after the other. So it does automatic adjustments to the photograph. And then I do this action over here. So I'd come to this combo where it would have another signature like this. I always delete the one I don't need. Since I'm doing regular, I delete the black and I keep the white signature. That's the last part of the action. And this is the second part of the last action. This is the first where I burn with velocity blend mode. I would dodge with the screen. And I always want to be in the layer masked. And a lot of times when I burn, I want to use a soft brush. Oops. The big brush. I'm going to use my left bracket key to get smaller. And I always want to use a soft brush. Soft round brush. And so I'd paint the entire photograph. So basically, this would be black. I'd be painting the improvements on a black layer mask. So this would be black. So when I do this, let's see. Ah, darn. When I do this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to run this action. It's calling other actions. It's calling the dodge and burn. It's making an adjustment layer. It's calling two signatures. So when I do this, I'm going to move the thing over. I'm going to play. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to play this action. So it produces, but I'm going to push F12. I'm going to go back to the beginning. There. So when I run this action, let's see, go back over here. Okay. I want to run this action where it makes a copy and it just runs image, auto tone, auto contrast, auto color. I'm going to push F12. I'm going to go back to beginning. Whoops, I'm going to push F12. Whoops, yeah, that's right. What's going on? There we go. So when I run this, and this is soft light, this is part of another action group. And when I run action groups, let's see. I do one action and I do another action, one right after the other. So this is, dust and scratches is up here. Dust and scratches, I have it set to 1.3. And then the speckle, there's no prompts. Noise, the speckle. And this last action where I end this, but I run the high pass, I make a setting, just the settings, and then I get this. I always want to end in soft light blending mode. Now these others, if I make a selection, actually, if I make a selection, these others, oops. Yeah, minimum. This is great for taking out the white to fringe edges. If you have like white fringe, you make a selection with a lasso and you do minimum and take out some white fringes you don't want to see. I'm going to do Control D, Control Command D to take that out. Now, if I want to put this in a frame, I go to my frame action, where it plays this action and then it plays this action. Where when it plays this action, it looks for this action. It pauses this action. It runs these steps, and then it looks for this action. And then it comes over here, and then it does more. And then it goes this action, and this action has a condition. It's called MP cons, where if the document is landscape, it's going to call the big width, and the big width is over here. But if it's not, it's big height, and the big height is over here, where the longest side for the height is 4,000 pixels. Then the big width, the width is 4,000. So when I run this action, image size would be, the height would be 4,000 because it's more of a portrait document than a landscape. Sometimes I have it to 200, but sometimes I have it to 300. But the longest side, the width of the height is 4,000. In this case, it's the width. So I'm going to push F12 to go back to the beginning. And I'm going to open up another photograph. So again, some similar steps where I'd run this action. When I run this action, it's going to make a duplicate layer, which this happens. This is where the, then I run this action. So I run this action. I'm going to do it right now. But I already did that. So I'm going to push F12. And then after I do that, then I run my dodge and burn group where so it's going to look for this action. It's going to, let's see, burn luminosity blend node, screen, dodge, and a screen blend node. So what I want to do in both of these, I'm going to run this action. Let's see. Photograph changes, but we're not done. Whoops. Where I would invert it by doing Control I. What I like to do is use the soft brush, soft round brush, and I make my thing bigger. I think it looks like with the new version of Adobe Photoshop. And then what I like to do is use a different, so that's why. You always want to start, make sure you're at 100%. Now, what I like to do, I feel like that's too much. I'm going to do Control Z, where I'm going to lower the opacity to make it look more natural, like maybe 10 to 25. I like to just use 10. I don't want to just try to make it look natural. Push F12 to go back to the original file. And then the last part of the step, this is the last part of the signature. I always delete the black one. I keep the white one for outdoors. I just want to click on the auto. And I want to bring it, I just want to affect the mid-tone slider. I don't want to touch the shadows or the highlights. I want to use the midtones. So I do my frame, if I were to do that. This frame we'll call 2 actions. This action we'll call other actions, and this action we'll call other actions. Where, you know, the image size, the height is 4,000, the longest side. It's just the same action to use other. It calls this action, it looks for this action, comes on over here, does more steps, it finds this action, does this, calls that action, and they come back to up here where the cons it's condition. Since this is a portrait, it's going to call, let's see, it's going to call the big height. It's going to call this. It's going to set the height to 4,000 and it look like this. It's set the height to 4,000 because it's a portrait document more than a landscape. I'm going to push F12. And I'm going to open up. We did this one. Let's see. Well, let's see. We're going to my navigator here. I'm going to make my screen smaller. We could do this one. Do the same thing, same actions. So I run that action. And this is from another action. It's sort of the same thing where you're going to make sure that your opacity 100. I want to make sure your flow is about 19% for regular painting. And I don't worry about the smoothing. Let's see. I think I may go back to the screen. Let's see. We got Adobe Photoshop. Let's see. I'm gonna go here. Whoopsie. I'm gonna do new screen share. And now we're going to talk about Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop screenshots. This will answer more questions. So basically, I know that the Adobe version is a little different because what I think is going to happen with Adobe is people are not liking the AI and they may move it back to something like this. So, but the first thing I do is, in the color screen, I think it was, I want to set the white balance, find a neutral, balance the colors. There's many ways I can use this. You know, I can zero out the highlights. I can plus out the shadows. I can go -40 for the highlights, +40 for, I could do all sorts of things. Now for black and white photography, I want to do everything in Photoshop. I used to decrease the vibrance, decrease the saturation. So for regular HDR, I like to try to zero out the highlights. It depends on how much light. I mean, I got to look at the photograph. If I'm just doing one exposure, I may just zero out just the highlights, or go in a negative direction. Like for highlights, I may get -50. I want to look at the photograph and it looks pleasing. I want to go by the way it looks. Now the texture, clarity, I know the other, I think it might have been color or effects. I think this was in the effects part of the other, in the other modern Photoshop, where I want to be between 2 and 3. Now, in other types of photography, like in light painting, still life, I sometimes just may leave the, for light painting, I leave the highlights alone. I don't touch shadows. I just worry about the white balance. So there's many ways I can use, you know, the basic tab. This curve selection, I like to leave this alone. I know some photographers want to make an S, but I don't touch this. Detail, you know, with the other screen, it had AI denoise. For this current version, also for this version, the current version, I don't touch this because I feel like I want to sharpen at the ends. So I don't touch noise reduction. And the other thing, it was like noise, I don't touch that. I don't think it's even worth using the AI. Now, the optics, it's about the same, where it looks very familiar, but the R6, R5, these are both checked. And this is great for color problems of the edges. And this helps the lens profile with the camera. So you want to have both of these checks. Now for the geometry, a lot of times I just want to click on the A. Boom, I'm done. Maybe I could use this one, but I don't use the others. And then I want to do everything else in Photoshop, like if this is not, if it's slanted. But a lot of times the A will help me, you know, correct distortion problems. The effect is, this is located somewhere else in a more modern version of Adobe Camera Raw, where I want to make a slide vignetting. I gotta check the chat. All right, thanks. I will have this recorded, yes. I don't mess around with the calibration. I may play around with the vignetting, then make it a slight vignette, but this is also great for correcting, you know, color light problems. Like if this part of the screen is dark and this part's light, you can make it even with this. This is the image processor. This is where it is, where if I want to use the image processor, like for a series of photographs, Photoshop, that have the same settings, I want to post to the web, I want to convert to sRGB. If I want to copy in Photoshop, I don't want to have this checked because I don't want to mess around with two profiles. Then we get Photoshop. This is that first action where I make a background copy, then I do this. Actually, wait, this is for, if I have 3 HDR files, where I first select everything, do Control A, then do a selection, I select the whole photograph, then I run this action, auto align layers and auto blend layers. So you get, you know, a copy of a big layer, and you got layers with layer mask. So I just flatten that image. And this is the second thing I could do. A lot of times I start here, where you saw in the Photoshop, I make a copy of the background layer that I do this action. I do auto tone, auto contrast, and color. Where this is, I duplicate the current layer, the background layer, and then run this, and then save. If I'm doing a series of Photoshop saves, I'll run this action, and then I have like Ben Pucciarelli, then underscore 14. I would just change it to file number. But I could also go to File, Save in Photoshop too. Then you got dodge and burn, where we only start here. Then we do levels adjustments, and then we do signature layers, where we got a black layer, a white layer. I delete the one I don't like, the last part of the action. The second last part of the action, you just click on the auto to straighten the colors. First part of the action, where I invert them, so the layer mask turn black, but I paint in white for the improvements. So, you know, white reveals, black hides. And I burn with luminosity blend mode. I dodge with the screen. Let's see. Yeah, glad you liked it. The high pass, where the dust and scratches filter, which is here, and there's no prompt for the speckle. The high pass, I'm always in the soft blend mode. Another, you know, another set of actions I do, we have the speckle, which I showed you, dust and scratches, and then the sharp mask would fade, where, and I always want to have it with luminosity or color blend mode. I just like to use luminosity. I like to keep the opacity to 100. So it's fade, whatever filter you use. It's, in this case, it'd be fade on sharp mask. Another set of actions where I despeckle the scratches. It's a regular sharpen, where I just have the sharpen and there's no other fade. My frame action, where I play this, I come down over here, I play this, do these steps, come over here. So I call their actions. Then I come over here, I have a condition where if the width is if it's the landscape, I come over here. If the portrait, I use the big height. This is my quick, you know, action to how I just save for the web, where I have quality 100, and it's always going to ask every time where I save it. I'll copy my copyright and content info. So as I post to the web, I do want to have this checked off, so that it says I convert to sRGB, because I'm not copying and pasting in Photoshop. I also have an action that does this, you know, where I could use the file export feature. This is after I do all this, that frame, the width is 4,000. So an image could look like. And the sharp mask have 200. I always want to use 1.0. I don't care if I'm doing HDR. Maybe I could use 1.5, but I'm using 1.0. I like that better. And a threshold is good contrast between 6 and 7 levels. The frequency separation, where this frequency is at a linear light, where you want to use all your clone tools on this layer. It's at a linear light. When this low is at a regular, this is when you want to use all your selections. When you run this action, it'll bring this prompt, and you can make, change it to 15. And paste in place in light painting, where I make a selection. I have two images of the same thing. I make a selection, paste in place, whatever is in the photograph will appear. And I always want to end in the light and blend modes. On my black and whites, there's a lot of cool things you can do with the gradient map, the color, or the black and saturation, a threshold with the color. So a lot of cool things you can do with the channel mixer. You get a complicated more black and white. These are the settings I want to use for the quick export. Only the quality is 100, and I want to convert the sRGB profile. All the settings are there. Because the color features RGB, red, green, blue. The color handling, convert the sRGB as you're posting to the web. I'm going to work for a little illustration. I have my layers, my brushes, my character and paragraphs. I have tabs. I have a set of tabs here, then I have a screen. I can navigate. I have another set of tabs. These are my photography groups, the Facebook. This Facebook is growing. It's over 2,000. It's like growing every day, adding a few members a day. Some of these I'm running with other people, some I'm running with myself. These are meetup clubs. This is my font art website. Where, it's a 25 discount for Halloween, for the Halloween occasion. And this is my YouTube channel, which is here. Where I have playlists, and no, I do not want to download too many downloads. Ah, man. This is a private channel doing experimentation. So we're going to look at this. Where I'll post a recording here. And this is a new section that I started on my YouTube channel. Now it's called YouTube of Still Life and Landscape by Michael Pucciarelli. In this section, we talk about some landscape information, the cameras and equipment I use, camera settings, Adobe Photoshop. This is a new section that I'll be building up. So I've equipped it Still Life and light painting. We have light painting webinars. We have black plexus webinars. We have Adobe software in Still Life. So white plexiglass, Adobe. So there's a lot you can learn from this channel. So does anyone have any questions? Are you burnt out or? All right. So I think what I'm going to do, if there's no questions, is email me. You're welcome to subscribe to my YouTube channel and visit my website. I'm going to stop the share. And the meeting for all, and I'll post a recording soon on the meetups.